Hello, everybody. My name's Andrew Fritz,
And I'm Damon Lewis.
and you're listening or watching the Surf the Astral podcast. It's a show on spirituality, just meditation, lucid dreaming, and the out-of-body experience. And today we have another special guest with us. This is Graham Nicholls. Graham, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. We're really excited about this. So everyone that's listening, if you don't know who Graham is, Graham Nicholls is an English author, as well as a lecturer and advisory board member for the Rhine Research Center. He is a leading practitioner and researcher in the out-of-body experiences. So in 2011, he published Avenues of the Human Spirit, a moving account of his personal journey and exploration of the nature of consciousness. His second book, Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, offers a totally new way to learn and approach the subject of OBEs and the extended mind. He's also a co-author of Consciousness Beyond the Body, a scientifically focused exploration of the theories and evidence for OBEs, published in February 2016. So welcome, Graham. Good to have you.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So Damon, I know you had an initial question.
Sure. I'd like to sort of just dive in to if today, right, you walk us through a typical day. If you're planning on going through your OBE experience, can you give us a typical day? Just give us a walkthrough. If there's any sort of special, your foods, just, and then what you're doing. Just give us an overview of your typical day currently.
Okay, well, we're in lockdown in the UK at the moment, so that means that I'm spending a lot of time at home or just there's some woods not far from where I live, so I kind of go for a walk there or whatever, but mostly it's kind of at home at the moment. But I guess in terms of out-of-body experiences, I try to have consistent practice every day, that I do some kind of work towards my spiritual practice or my development of my consciousness, that kind of thing. But I think this is a good question because I also like to mix it up. I don't do anything in a very sort of habitual way. I actually disagree with the concept of meditation every day and those kinds of things, for example, because I think that although meditation has a benefit, I also think that often it can become just a habit that people do, and they start to lose the benefit of it. So I try to have the consistency of practice, but I try to keep stretching myself and keep pushing my awareness. So one day I might do meditation, another day I might do work with remote viewing, and another day I might do energy work, or I might go out into nature and kind of just sort of connect with nature or whatever it might be. But each day I try to kind of mix things up a bit. I do a certain level of consistency, but I try to keep my mind inspired and going in new directions and exploring new things. So I guess a typical day is usually kind of trying to explore what sort of avenue I'm going to work with on that day, and looking at the latest sort of ideas and research that I've come up with and what might develop both my understanding for my own practice, but also I'm constantly thinking about ways that I can develop and help other people with their practice, and what might kind of move the dialogue on in terms of the best techniques and things like that. So yeah, I guess that's sort of how I approach things. So it's slightly different to a lot of the classic ideas about how spiritual practice should be, but I'm most interested in those moments when you're sort of outside of your comfort zone, those things that stretch our awareness in some ways, because I think that's when we really develop as people. And it's also, I think, the key to out-of-body experiences as well. I think that when we're in that sort of extended out of our comfort zone type space in our psychology, I think that's when it's most likely that something like an out-of-body experience or a spiritual experience might happen. So I'm always looking for ways to work with that. So that can be everything from forms of sensory deprivation, through to physical exhaustion, through to deep relaxation in a flotation tank, or out in nature, sort of more like shamanic techniques using movement. It can be a whole range of things. I'm very open to exploring whatever avenue might be most relevant.
Hmm. Did you have a
So
follow-up?
yeah, actually I do. So because that's one thing I struggle with myself, what you're talking about. So basically, you're sort of suggesting maybe a little more openness, playfulness, rather than like myself, or I've heard other people like kind of going to the gym, like, oh, it's something I got to do, and I'm not exactly happy about doing it, but I got to do that physical exercise. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think I mean the gym's a good analogy. I guess if you have, yeah, we need to do physical exercise. So you can take the approach of okay, I'm going to do this in a way where it sort of feels like you're forcing yourself to do something, and it's very hard to maintain that, because obviously as people we tend to move away from things that we don't really enjoy and all that kind of thing. But if you then, for example, if you bring in a way of doing exercise that you actually enjoy, whether that's martial arts or yoga, or whatever it might be, something that you actually find more engaging and more interesting, and even that maybe has a community connected with it and things like that, then your likelihood of being successful increases a lot. So I think that applies to most things in life, and I think the OBE is the same. I mean, I've been working with this for I've been having OBEs now for like 33 years or whatever. So if you want to keep the consistency of that kind of practice, then I think you've got to mix it up. Otherwise, it's just going to stagnate and it's going to become uninteresting. So I think it's important to keep exploring ways to work with it. I mean, the actual OBE is always fascinating and transformative and amazing, even when it's just quite a mundane thing, like just seeing the room from another angle or something. I think even that has an amazing quality of telling us that something powerful is possible and is out there. But the process to get to that point is often what we associate stress, or we have struggles with. So I think that's when mixing things up can be a lot more interesting.
Cool. Very cool.
I have so many questions, but I guess the first one I want to ask would be around diet. So a few years ago I changed over to kind of more plant-based, and it was almost like right around the same time that I started getting into lucid dreaming and out-of-body stuff. And do you find that there's a connection, or that having a certain style of diet or focusing on what you're putting in your body, does that have any connection, you think, to the out of body experience, or just that?
I do. I've I've been vegan for 15, 16 years now, and
Mhm.
was vegetarian before that for another sort of 14 years or so. So basically, I've always felt that being plant-based definitely helps. So I advocate a whole food plant-based diet, similar to what someone like Michael Greger would advise. If you are familiar with him, he does a website called nutritionfacts.org.
Mhm.
So that's sort of where I come from with that. I think that it's not that diet will literally get you there on its own, but it's basically, I think we should use all of the individual small benefits that we can have in order to move us closer to being successful with having an experience. And diet is one of the things we can do. So obviously, let's say it gives you a 5-10% benefit, something like that. If you do multiple things that are giving you this 5% benefit, then soon you've got a significant increase. So I think in a way OBEs are a little bit like being an athlete or something like that. The body is a part of the process. We need to make sure that our psychology is sort of balanced, that our body, our physiology is in the right state before we try to have the out of body experience. All of those kind of factors. So yeah, I think obviously diet will help with that. If you I don't know, if you're drinking too much caffeine or you're all these kinds of things, it's going to disrupt your sleep, it's going to disrupt your ability to relax, it's going to, which can also be true of being overweight to a significant level, or all those kinds of things. So all of it factors in. So I think it's important to look after our health in the whole process of developing these skills.
Right. That brings me to the next one is what I found interesting with you was that, because when I do some sort of research about people that do out of body experiences or have them, usually it all revolves around sleep. Usually it's some sort of wake back to bed method where they're maybe after 6 hours and then they start their practice. That seems to be common, at least from what I've seen. And then with you, it seemed different that you have it from like the waking conscious perspective, where I guess sometime throughout the day, or it's not necessarily revolving around your sleep, I guess. Is that correct? And could you talk about that?
Yeah, it's totally correct. I hardly ever, we're talking probably less than 1% of my experiences are from a sleep state. So I think a lot of that's to do with the internet age, to be honest. I think when I was getting into OBEs pre-internet, the majority of people were doing it from a waking state. They weren't using sleep methods. And even if you look at a lot of the sort of older, or the authors who've been around a bit longer, William Bjorman, for example, uses Othniel's little method. That was how he induced his first experience. And as far as I know, that's how he still induces his experiences. So that's not a sleep-based method. And a lot of methods of different authors out there are conscious-based. But I think what's happened with the advent of the internet, lucid dreaming has sort of come to the fore as I guess as a kind of shortcut method, as a kind of for people to go, and it's become a sort of popular methodology. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think lucid dreaming can be a good launch pad for OBEs, and it's definitely one method that I advise and teach people. But I always also tell them that the downside is that it's probably going to be less objective, and you're going to have a higher likelihood that the dream will have an influence on the consistency and objectivity of the experience, because your consciousness will still be in a semi-groggy sleep type state. So it can be easier to get there that route, but the quality of the experience might not be as objective. So it's a kind of weighing up the benefits and the pluses and minuses, if you like. So yeah, I had my first spontaneous out of body experiences from just a relaxed waking state, and then I also the only technique that I came across as a teenager was a waking state method, so I used that. And then a lot of the research at the time, there was Gabbard and Trammell, I think is the name of the scientist, did a study. And at that time, when they asked many people what kind of state they were in when they had their out-of-body experiences, it was in the region of 70% of people were having their out-of-body experiences from a waking state. So I think that might even still be the case. I don't know of a recent study looking at that particular element. There's a researcher called Carlos Alvarado. He is probably the leading researcher looking at the phenomenology and the details of what happens when someone has an out-of-body experience. He might have looked at that more recently, but basically it's I think it's possibly true that people are more likely to have an OBE actually from a waking state than from a dreaming state, but it's just that it's become popular in the realm of methodology and things like that. So I think it's an internet thing, in short.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. That on that note, I really like talking to people such as yourself that are very technical about things, that really like a scientific base, I've actually people I've talked to, and I've really seen how people who have uh, that sort of grounding are much more, have much more success, and from what I've seen. Would you mind talking to us about the G technique, and could you be as technical and specific as possible? So, walking us through that. Is that okay with you?
Well, I can try and sort of talk about the mechanisms that sort of developed it, I guess is a good way of doing it. Basically, the idea behind it was to consider what is the perfect state to launch the out of body experience, because I think the thing that people generally miss when they're learning to have these types of experiences is they focus too much on, say, the final visualization, or they focus too much on, even if they're using a dream method, they'll focus too much on getting into the lucid dream and not enough on the conditions that will help cause the lucid dream. So, they'll focus on affirmations, or they'll focus on reality checks, or if they're using a waking method, they'll focus on the visualizations and all of that, but they won't focus very much on being in the right kind of state before they begin the whole process. So the G technique was basically a way that I developed to get to the right kind of state, a bit like what Robert Monroe describes, mind awake, body asleep, that kind of dynamic where the body is essentially, I think all the techniques are aimed at getting the body out of the picture, getting the body into the background. So the focus is all on your consciousness or your conscious experience in that moment. So the G technique was a way of using physical muscle tension, physical exhaustion in the body, whilst also maintaining, through breathing techniques, maintaining awareness and heightened perception mentally. So getting that dynamic. So a combination of breathing and muscle tension to basically create that that dynamic to get you to the out of body experience. So basically, I think that all OBE techniques or all methodologies, that's really what they're aiming for, but often they don't directly work with the body in order to get to that. So a lot of my work has been focused on how can we work with our own physiology to get to that point. So that's why I was mentioning flotation tanks, sensory deprivation, all of these things, that there's loads of research that's been done on them that show that we can get into a very deep state by using these kinds of methods, but they're often overlooked. We don't sort of hear very much about using that kind of methodology and using simple versions of it that we can recreate at home. Like I mentioned in my book, the Ganzfeld is a method that was used in telepathy research, for example, that uses half ping pong balls over the eyes and a red light, which causes the eyes to dilate. So then your eyes are looking for information, your brain is searching for information, because it would expect to have visual stimulus, but there's nothing there. So what happens is the brain starts to generate imagery, and that imagery is often psychic in nature. So I think it's a way of bypassing the senses, the normal senses, and getting access to that psychic information that starts to come through when you kind of switch off the visual field. You usually wear headphones with pink noise as well, so even the sound side of things is blacked out as well. So you just have this uniform, characterless field of sound and visuals. So yeah, so basically it's usually referred to as perceptual deprivation rather than sensory deprivation, because there's still a stimulus, and it's still you're still lightly aware of things going on, whereas full sensory deprivation is like in a tank or whatever, where you can't see anything and it's complete blackness. And often there was a researcher called John Zubek, who did 15 years of research into sensory deprivation, and he used kind of things over the arms and over different parts of the body. So basically you couldn't feel your body anymore. So that's another interesting thing that you can do to try and you can use flotation, or you can use objects and blackout goggles and things like that in order to help facilitate that same kind of mind alertness while the body becomes secondary to the experience. So in essence, the G technique is a methodology to create that as well. So there's lots of different ways we can work with it, but I think the important thing is to work with this idea of creating that dynamic. If we have that dynamic, then it's very easy to launch the OBE from that state. If that's not there, then you're setting yourself up at a deficit from the beginning. You've got to sort of, just with a visual technique, you've got to try and get yourself to that point where you're ready for an OBE. This is maybe why a lot of the dream methods are popular, because obviously when the body is asleep, literally asleep, you don't have to then get to that point where the body is out of the picture. You just, so it's sort of going the other way around. You can either go from consciousness to shutting the body down while retaining consciousness, or you can be already in the body shut down and then regain consciousness, i.e. lucid dreaming. So they're reaching the same point, but coming just from different angles. But basically you want to be in that liminal in between phase where the body is out of the picture and the mind is alert.
Okay.
Andrew, I just have a follow-up question. If
Yeah.
do you mind holding your question, Andrew?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. So on that same note, this is something I've really been sort of wondering with your experiences and all the information that you've gathered. I really would like to know if you can give a little clarity to the consciousness before and after, and during that sort of crossover moment. And I'll give you sort of two examples. One is one of my most clear moments was meditating and going straight from, I woke up at night, I started meditating, have a little bit of a feeling that I might start a lucid dream, and I went from meditating, go into immediately a lucid dream. There was no conscious, I didn't lose awareness. I clicked over and woke up into a lucid dream. And also I've taken a class and I've seen Nancy Tribolato do the velo technique and go straight from doing the velo technique into the vibrational state and then projecting with no loss of consciousness. She was sitting in a chair and she projected straight from that. So normally I think the idea of, regaining consciousness and all these kind of things, where is it that we can just not lose consciousness? Where, instead of like how a typical lucid dream would be, going from a fully lucid exercise into a fully lucid projection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't really lose consciousness ever when I do. Like I said, 99.9% of my OBEs are from a waking state, and I go straight into the out body experience. There isn't a loss of consciousness. My body is not asleep when I have the experience, which has been looked at. I've done work to sort of verify that. There's no rapid eye movement when I'm in the experience, and my breathing and brain waves don't go into anything consistent with what we know about sleep or dream. So those are, like I said, for me, they're lucid dreams and OBEs are very distinctive, different things. And I don't really go one via the other. I mean, I learned to do it literally just really as an exercise to, okay, people talk about having OBEs from lucid dreams. So I thought, okay, I better learn to do that just, just as an experiment really. And that's why I kind of learned it. But I would say that this pre-state before an OBE is very similar to the kind of a little bit like the high that you get from doing exercise or something like that. It's a very alert, kind of expanded sort of energy type feeling, which, yeah, you can also get from meditation. As you mentioned, this sort of feeling like there's an expanse beyond your eyes, and that's kind of like your mind is flooded with light. For example, I've had things like that, or laying down and sometimes perceiving the room with my eyes shut, like I'm looking through my eyelids. That's another thing that happens. But yeah, I don't really lose consciousness, so it's a bit tricky to sort of go into that. I think someone who's more lucid dream focused would be better for that question.
Okay.
Graham, I guess, can you talk about, from when I'm talking with other people that get into out of body experiences, it seems that in the beginning stages, it's, getting up and out of the body. They can, maybe they're in their bedroom, or they can see their physical body, or just around their immediate surroundings or neighborhood. Can you talk about when you, as your out of body experiences started to evolve, what were you experiencing or experimenting with or exploring, whether it was maybe physical universe or other maybe dimensions of reality? What was that like for you?
At the beginning, I think the experiences were heavier and more dense feeling, more physical in many ways, you could say. I often did have a sense of a body in the early experiences, but over time, the body sort of diminished, and I started to experience more like a pure consciousness. The early experiences were often in the sort of darker color spectrum, lots of violet and sort of deep blue, and those kinds of colors were prevalent in those early experiences, a bit like your image in the background, actually. Those kind of colors. And as the experience kind of developed, it seemed to open up more into sort of yellows and greens and things like that, and then blue grays and things like that as well. So it kind of, there was a sort of expansion in terms of color. The body, like I mentioned, I mean the energy body, not my physical body. The sense of an energy body or a double became increasingly less apparent, to the point that, yeah, it's very rare that I experience any kind of body now. It's maybe, it seems to only occur if it's kind of necessary for the experience, in a way, like as if I'm standing somewhere in the out of body experience, then I might experience a body. But if I'm just moving and drifting, which is the majority of the experiences, I won't experience any kind of body. Which interestingly is also true of the majority of people when you look at the research. Again, the research shows that only about 30% of people experience a body in their out of body experiences. So the majority, 70%, experience either a sphere, kind of ball, orb of energy kind of experience, or they experience a traveling consciousness. I think the traveling consciousness is the most common. So then in terms of where I went initially, yeah, it tended to be quite sort of just in my bedroom. It took me a long time to get out of my bedroom. Actually, I was kind of stuck in my bedroom for about the first 6 months of the experiences. I think a lot of that was to do with fears or worries about leaving the immediate vicinity of my body. But when I became more comfortable and I got over that initial fear, I remember moving through the window of I grew up in a tower block, apartment block, like with 20 floors. And I remember I had to kind of push through the window. It was a very strange sensation. The nearest I can compare it to is if you get two magnets and you put them the wrong way around, where they repel each other, and you get that kind of force between the two magnets that sort of repel. It was like that, but I sort of pushed through, and then I sort of drifted through the window, and right opposite where my window in that building was actually another building that had a pyramid for a roof, like a, you know, a really classic pyramid. And I sort of drifted across. It wasn't very far, maybe 20 meters, something like that, and basically landed on the pyramid roof. And then after this, I started to move a little bit further each time. Each time I had an experience, I would go a bit further, and I kind of moved around, maybe within a mile or two of the vicinity of where I was living. Um, and then I did start to work with trying to get into other levels of reality, which I used, for example, the tattva symbols, which the are Hindu elemental symbols. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn used to use those symbols as astral doorways. And I read a book by J.H. Brennan called Astral Doorways, which made me think, oh, okay, maybe this is a way to start to get to other levels. So I started to do that. But I think a lot of those experiences were more maybe symbolic. They were more to do with my own unconscious mind, etc. So I think for a long time there was a degree of the experiences were kind of illusory when I went into these other levels, and I didn't really know what to make of them. But then I think what it was is maybe this initial level is quite illusory, like it between physical and maybe these transphysical or these other kinds of levels that we can get to. And I think sometimes we have to go through this semi-illusory level. And then I think there was a sort of breakthrough where I had this shared death experience where I perceived about 140 people who died in a plane crash. And then that turned out to actually have happened. And that environment was obviously not in physical reality, but it seemed to be verified by what I found out about the people who died. So I think I started to then realize that there are these other levels, but they have a kind of different quality to the other experiences, which maybe I've been calling the astral or whatever. They seem kind of illusory to me, and obviously people have different experiences with that, but that's how it kind of was for me. And actually, if you read a lot of the esoteric writings on the astral, they do often describe the astral as being a kind of illusory level. So I think things with OBEs is there's a mixture of the objective and the subjective, and part of the skill with OBEs is getting to the point where we can discern between the subjective and the objective, and we can develop the experience so that we move more towards the objective. And I think a lot of that is to do with things like meditational practice or pushing ourselves with things like remote viewing and things where you try to psychically perceive things as they really are. And the more we train ourselves to do that, it's like we refine our senses, and then we start to be able to perceive things more objectively in this world and in like other levels.
Yeah. Yeah, I think is that the experience where you said there was a bunch of people doing like life reviews? Is that the same? I think I've heard maybe in another interview there's.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, when you're talking about that, that was sounded really awesome. Just to I just the fact, I think you said it was like not long ago after the experience that you saw on television that there was the crash.
The same day, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Um, Damon, did you have some follow up or?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, is there realms that you go to, certain places that you go to, or certain beings or people that you meet with maybe more regularly, like things that you're sort of in regular contact with, working with, people that you're working with at all? Or is it more mainly just an exploration, sort of maybe a little more random?
I think it's maybe a bit of both of that. I mean, there are, I guess I'm very neutral about what these beings or things that you can contact are. I tend to refer to them as sort of archetypes or something like that. I mean, I'm not, they could be purely objective, or they could be an aspect of myself or a higher self, or I don't really know how to look at it. But yeah, I've kind of, in my first book, I wrote about the Shah and May experiences, which are, I guess I see them a little bit like um, something like a higher self, or something along those kinds of lines, or guides, or something of that description. I don't know, again, how objective I would say they are, but they're definitely something that on a personal level I work with. I don't talk about it too much because I don't know how important it is in terms of for other people. I think that's something that everyone needs to explore for themselves, and kind of ask those questions of what those things mean. But I definitely work with those on a regular basis. I also have had some interesting experiences which I maybe put down to kind of almost like ancestral things. I had an experience with Odin, which I also wrote about in my first book, which is almost, again, I've put it maybe into the category of being archetypal or ancestral memory or something like that. But I literally, one of the things that came through was a rune, for example. And when I looked into that rune, I couldn't find that particular rune. It wasn't part of the standard rune alphabets that we see. And then quite a while after, months after the experience, I came across the Anglo-Saxon runes, which would be the British runes essentially. And I found that the rune that I'd seen was the rune for Odin, or Woden, within the Anglo-Saxon pantheon. So it was literally like, again, I had some kind of verification that there was something objective going on. Now, was that something like the Akashic records kind of idea? Was that some kind of ancestral connection to some innate memory, a kind of atavistic kind of experience? Or was it something objective, that there is these kind of beings that are kind of godlike or whatever? So basically, I'm open to the interpretation of what that means, but I think that people across the world, when they connect with these things, there are these consistencies that tend to come through again and again and again. And often there are things that have these objective cultural references, or they have objective elements to them that we can't explain in an ordinary sense. So yeah, so it's kind of that's also something that feels very it feels like it sort of guided me a lot in my life as well. I guess I ended up going to Finland, and then moving to Estonia, which is very close to Finland. Helsinki and Tallinn are like only an hour and a half away from each other. And I lived there for nearly a decade. And I never saw that as having any connection with any of that kind of stuff. But then more recently, I discovered that the current sort of archaeological opinion on the origins of the Odin belief systems and all of that is that it originated probably in the image of a Finnish shaman. So Odin was probably a Sami or some form of Finnish or Finnic shaman, because Estonia, a lot of people assume that Estonia is an Eastern European sort of Slavic culture, but it's not. It's actually a Finnic culture. So the languages are very similar between Finnish and Estonian. And a lot of their culture is far more Nordic. It's not similar to Russia or anything like that. It's much more similar to Finland. So there's this kind of Nordic. They even had Estonian Vikings in of Saaremaa, for example, which is off the west coast of Estonia. So there's these sorts of links. It's almost like there's a certain kind of guidance or some kind of interesting links that have kind of unfolded in my life that are connected with these kind of experiences of different beings and different levels of reality. So in terms of levels, one that's been very consistent is I guess what a lot of people will refer to as the Summerland kind of level, or I've also heard it called like the park. I'm not exactly sure if people mean exactly the same thing with those two terms, but essentially it's an Earth-like realm that's very beautiful, scenic, summer-like, and it seems to be associated with when people first have a near-death experience or an afterlife type experience. When they go onto that initial level, they seem to experience that kind of environment. And I've had experiences with that level quite a few times, and again, it had the quality that I would associate with the more objective experiences, like the shared death experience with the plane crash. It's very hard to describe it objectively, but there's a quality about those levels that's very different to my teenage astral type experiences that I mentioned. And it's also, there's a quality to it that's sort of, yeah, it's very hard to explain, but it's got something different that I can highlight and I can usually understand. So then I pay more attention when those experiences happen.
Yeah, Andrew and I were actually just talking about this yesterday, how the lower, say like real time zone, much easier to describe. But when you get to higher levels, everything's you have to sort of experience it. You can't describe a color that's no one else has seen with their eyes. Like, how do you describe that? How do you describe a color that's nobody else has seen?
Yeah.
So Grant, something I noticed with you, there's like a calmness, there's a openness, and you've even mentioned the word neutral. Are these things that are kind of, you've always kind of been this way, or something you've developed along the way? And do you find that those qualities within yourself help with having out-of-body experiences? I know it's kind of a weird question, but
No, not really. um, I think it's partly because of the out-of-body experiences. I think the sort of calmness thing has come from the out-of-body experiences, or from that kind of spiritual connection, or whatever. I don't think as like growing up or whatever, I was necessarily, I think I've changed a lot as a person from the sort of kid that I was as a sort of teenager, and a lot of the problems and things that were going on in the environment that I was in London at the time. But yeah, I guess the neutrality thing and the kind of more scientific approach has been something that's developed as well, because I guess when I first started, I was much more, I guess I read the books and I believed everything. I read all of the out-of-body experience books and astral projection books and everything, and I was kind of very much invested in these different esoteric frameworks or occult frameworks and all these different ideas. But then I started to question them because certain things just didn't add up. It started with my first teacher, the first person I was sort of had a mentor with when I was sort of about 15, Douglas Baker, who was coming from a theosophical, I mean, he didn't call himself a theosophist, but most of his ideas were from people like Alice Bailey, and it was very heavily esoteric, theosophical kind of thinking. And he one day adamantly said to me that people who are under 18 can only see in black and white when they have out-of-body experiences, because this was the sort of belief of the framework that he believed in, that had these very clear lines between one level and one state of awareness and another. And I remember thinking, as soon as he said that even when I was 12 and I had my first spontaneous experiences, they were full color. There was nothing black and white about them, and that it was that, I think, that put the seed there that, okay, I'm not sure we should take all of these books and all of these ideas on face value. And so I just wanted to try and find out what was really going on. And I became increasingly frustrated with people saying, oh yeah, but that's that's your astral body, or that's this, or that's that. And I'm like, well, but those ideas don't really fit with what I'm actually experiencing, you know, and what other people are experiencing as well. For example, people would constantly talk about silver cords and things like that. And I was like, well, I've never actually seen a silver cord, you know. And then I looked into how many other people had seen it. And in the research, depend on what study you look at, it's usually 0 to 3% roughly of people will describe something like that. But in a lot of the esoteric books from Muldoon and Carrington onwards, and you know, the IAC and organizations like that, they talk a lot about the silver cord, and it's just not backed up by the research. It's just not there in the majority of people's experiences. And I started to think, well, what we should start with the experience. We shouldn't start with beliefs about the experience or claims about the experience. We should start with what we personally experience, and then we should go and look at what the majority of people experience. So some people do have a silver cord, but they do see one, but it's a real minority. So what we should be asking, in my opinion, is what are the majority of people experiencing, and what does that sort of tell us? So I started to do that, and that's when I realized that, okay, bodies and silver cords are probably not where it's at. Most people are experiencing more of a traveling consciousness and a kind of, or a sphere of awareness. So if that's more the true nature of the OBE, if that's what most people are experiencing, what would that suggest? Maybe that suggests that instead of an energy body or a spirit or an astral body or whatever the traditional viewpoint was, maybe it's more like a traveling consciousness or an extended consciousness, or maybe it's that our minds and our sensory experience can be separate from the body. So maybe it's literally like the mind is interconnected with the world around us. So if we start from the experience, it might actually lead us to a new understanding, and maybe a better understanding of what might be going on with the out of body experience. So it's sort of, so I guess my neutrality and my kind of scientific approach, it sort of came out of practicality in a way. It came out of like, I wanted to get better at doing it, and I wanted to get better at teaching other people to do it, and I wanted to get a deeper understanding of what's really going on. And I realized at a certain point that just believing blindly what was said 200 years ago or 100 years ago was not the way to do that. If we want to move the subject forward, we've got to really dig into the information and try to kind of unravel new ideas and try to really sort of understand what's going on. I think there's still loads of areas we need to look into. We were talking a bit earlier about like the visual perception, like colors and how things change and things like that. And I think that alone, no one's actually analyzed that. It's crazy. But in out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, the assumption has always just been that vision is always the same as physical reality. And no one's actually really dug into that. Because, for example, if we take some of the near-death experience research, it was like the AWARE study by Sam Parnia that was done recently, was the biggest study into near-death experiences that's ever been done. Now, Sam Parnia and the other researchers just assumed that vision was exactly the same as physical vision. So the targets that they set up for people to hopefully see while in the out-of-body experience were things like newspaper cuttings and stuff like that. But the thing is, people in near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences rarely, if ever, have described seeing newspapers or text on, you know, I mean, I can think of one instance where I saw text, whereas the vast majority of what people describe are small three-dimensional objects. So if we think about classic near-death experience descriptions, you can think about, for example, the most famous one, Pam Reynolds. She described having her head cut open with a small drill that looks a bit like an electric toothbrush. So she saw this small three-dimensional object. Then we can think there's the classic denture case where there was in Pim van Lommel's research in Holland, there was a man who had his dentures removed because he was in a cardiac arrest. They put his dentures into a cart and took them away. The man saw all of this. So again, he described seeing the dentures. So we're talking about a small three-dimensional object. Then there's other cases, the famous tennis shoe, which was a bit like a Converse All-Star kind of style shoe with that was kind of dark blue, and that was on a ledge. Another famous case. Again, you got a small three-dimensional object. So my approach would be, okay, so if we look at the studies, the things people most commonly describe are small three-dimensional objects. So let's make the target in a study, if we're going to have targets, let's make it a small three-dimensional object, because that's what people most consistently describe. So yeah, it's all kind of, my approach has all come from a desire to improve both our tech methodologies and also our understanding of what the experience actually is.
So you mentioned teaching. That's something I noticed on your website. This is a good time. Can you talk about, what someone would expect if they took a class with you, or however you do that, and how people connect with you and so forth?
Okay, well, there's a few options really. I have an online, video recorded lecture course, which is basically hours of classes describing techniques, going through all of those kinds of understandings of consciousness, the science, and how all of that information helps us get better at having our body experiences and how we can induce the experiences more effectively. So I've got an online course like that. And then there's also the option that they can do the course and, as part of the package, have like an hour of private tuition with me where I answer any questions that come up during the course and all of that kind of thing. So they can do that. Then there's also a package where they can get my sound technology, which is works with infrasound and subliminal commands and things like that. So there's that as well, which I should emphasize is not binaural beats, because people often assume that, but it's not. It's a completely different thing. And then there's also the option to do private tuition, where I do that as kind of like a course of sessions with me. So I take you step by step through the process of learning, basically. So that's obviously very tailored to the individual. So whatever their needs are and their skills are, as well as their goals and motivations, some people have slightly different aims of what they want to achieve, and etc. So I do that as well as a one-on-one way of learning. So yeah, they're the main options. And I'm also now including my second book, the original version of my second book, with the course as well, because that's currently not available until the new edition, the 10th anniversary edition, comes out later this year or early in the new year. So.
Okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the sound technology? What actually is it? What's that sound technology?
Well, the infra-liminal sound came from the fact that I'd experimented a bit with binaural beats, and I found that they made me relaxed or in a kind of meditational state, but they didn't really do very much for me. So I started to experiment with, okay, let's look at sound. I think sound is a good way to go. It's been used, for example, drumming within shamanic cultures and things like this have been used for millennia, really, to induce altered states and go out of body, etc. So I was kind of curious, can we develop a sound technology that will get you maybe at least to the vibrational state? So I would try to go into the vibrational state And then we would monitor the kind of brain frequencies that I would get to when I'm in the vibrational state. And then from there, we would take that information and we looked at what happened when certain frequencies were played, in terms of how that might alter the person's perception, and if we could regulate different vibrations, different frequencies, and whether that would have an impact on the conscious experience of the person. I also then put in subliminal messages to see if that would have an impact. So basically, over a period of time, we just went systematically through different frequencies, exploring what frequencies seem to help take someone into a kind of altered state or shift their awareness. And so the infra-liminal technology came from exploring all of those different things. When we put it all together over a period of time, it came together as it basically will guide a large percentage of people to the vibrational state. It's not going to induce an out of body experience directly, but what it does is it teaches you how to get to the vibrations, and especially if you tune into it, you have to sort of tune into it. It's not, you don't just listen to it passively, you sort of tune into it, and it will guide you to that point where the vibrations tend to happen. And then from there, if you're in the vibrational state, vibrations are not the only launch pad for OBEs, I should emphasize, but it's the most common way. And if you get to the vibrations, then it's much easier to go into the full out of body experience with a few techniques. So basically, I use that sound technology as a combination with other techniques like the G technique, like more visual mental techniques. Like I bring it all, it goes back to what I was saying about if we bring in lots of small elements that are beneficial, overall you get a much greater chance of being successful in having the experience. So that's kind of my approach. It's kind of a holistic, multi-sensory approach to things.
Graham, how long is the track? And then do you have to listen to it like as you're falling asleep, or can you use it anytime, in the day, whenever you want? Or
well, because I tend to focus on waking state, the infraliminal one is the vibrational one. That's the main one that I use because it's for inducing conscious waking out of body experiences. That one's 1 hour 44 minutes, or around there. It's, you don't have to listen to the whole thing. It's that long to kind of give you time to kind of work. So if you want to sort of do a longer session, you've got that amount of time. It's basically running on a 20-minute cycle. So the 20-minute cycles is because a lot of people, when they go into a trance or when they go into a hypnotic trance, it seems to run on 20-minute cycles. So I built the track in this 20-minute cycle framework as well to kind of help with that process. So yeah, I think the most important part is the first, say, 20 to 30 minutes, because that's the most important phase in the whole process of if you're trying to induce an OBE. I tend to think if you haven't got to an OBE within about 30 minutes, it's probably not going to happen. That's usually how it works from a waking state anyway. Then I have another track, which is the deep mind track. That one's more for pre-sleep programming. So that's more for the dreaming, lucid dreaming methods. So you listen to that, you can fall asleep listening to it. It just sounds, it's got subliminals and frequencies layered under it, but the over track sounds like water. So you're just sort of, it's just a relaxing water sound. So you can basically fall asleep to it, or you can listen to it and then turn it off and then go to sleep. So there's two different versions. Basically, one is to consciously get to the vibrational state, and the other one is for going into sleep. And you could also use the vibrational one if you did something like a sleep interruption when you wake up in the middle of the night. You could listen to the infraliminal vibrational track, the vibrational one track, and you can listen to that before you then go to sleep again. So you can use it in that way as well. So there's a few ways that you can use it.
Do someone purchase those separately, or does it come together, those two tracks, the different ones, the deep mind and the vibrational?
You can buy them as a discount together, or you can buy them separately, or you can get them as a package with the course as well. So there's 3 options.
Okay. Are you able to, is it physically shipped to you, or is it just download kind of the recording, or?
They're just downloads at the moment. I have had them on USB tracks, USB sticks before, but those are currently sold out. So yeah, so it's a download at the moment.
Cool. Okay. You'll go, Damon.
What type of in general, what type of person would you say, maybe characteristics of a person, is more successful that you've come across, and what type of person or characteristic is less successful?
The successful people are usually positive, creative types. When I say successful, what I should emphasize there is sort of successful the most quickly. I think that other types of people can still learn, but it often takes them a bit longer. So the people who tend to do it most effectively, most quickly, tend to be sort of musicians, artists, but also people who have a very open, exploratory kind of attitude, and they don't tend to get frustrated and stressed out easily. Because I think one of the sort of problems, like with me, that it took me 6 months of work initially to get to my first induced out of body experience. That required a lot of focus and a lot of work to kind of keep consistent with that. So the consistency was very important. But a lot of people get frustrated before they get to the point where they're likely to be successful. So I think actually the most common reason people don't have an out of body experience is simply that they give up. It's not that they couldn't do it, or it's not that, or they do it, they'll try a little bit for a week and then they'll forget about it for 3 months, and then they'll do a little bit again. To go back to your gym analogy from the beginning, it's like, it's the same kind of thing. People join the gym, New Year's thing, they sign up for the gym, they get down there, they do a really, really intense workout, maybe do that for the next 2 weeks, and then they kind of forget about it. Same with like when people learn a musical instrument or whatever it might be. So I think with whatever skill you're learning or whatever area of interest you're talking about, it's often the same kind of thing, that it's that consistency. But with OBEs, the consistency also needs to be in terms of your emotional and mental attitude. So that's what I'm talking about with not getting stressed and frustrated. So unfortunately, with an OBE, it's not just a matter that doing it consistently will get you there. You've got to do it consistently, but have the right mental attitude and right mental state as well. So yeah, positive, creative, exploratory, those kind of people tend to do well. I've very rarely found someone who can't get anywhere. But the one person who does come to mind who was a bit like that was literally the type of person that from the first time I spoke to them, they were kind of like, I'm never going to do this. I can't do this, So obviously that's not the right kind of attitude to go in with. You should always at least be sort of open, neutral about it. Let's see. That's a good way to look at it. Let's see what happens. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to keep open. I'm going to keep exploring. If that doesn't work straight away, let's kind of keep with it for a while, and not just sort of throw everything away the moment something doesn't work after 2 weeks or whatever. It does take. OBs do take time and effort, and I try to emphasize that it's not an area that there's not many people who learn it in a week, basically. I mean, I'm finding these days about 2 months of consistent practice does seem to be about right. That seems to be where, if the person keeps consistent for 2 months, that does seem to be a lot of people will get there at that kind of point. So I think if someone can at least commit to, let's say, 3 months, so hopefully they'll get there around 2 months or just after 2 months kind of point. So I think that's a good ballpark kind of figure for our current understanding of the techniques and our current, what are basically.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a lot of discipline, especially at a young age, to go from, or to work through those 6 months. I imagine at some points there was some frustrations, but do you feel that do you feel that it doesn't necessarily maybe took you 6 months to have the out-of-body experience? Do you feel that it was taking the 6 months to let go some sort of like internal blockage to kind of dissolve or let go to have the experience? Does that seem accurate? Or
I think that's very accurate. I think that's exactly what was going on. Yeah, I think there is a degree that time is important, because I think that, which I think a big part of it is getting the message to your unconscious mind that you're trying to do this, and this is going to be a part of your life, and this is going to be a consistent thing that you want to do. So I think that does seem to take a certain degree of time to get that across to yourself through doing the practice. It's almost something like muscle memory or something. You have to get to a point where that just sort of clicks, and but as you say, I think that it didn't need to take 6 months for sure. But I didn't have good techniques available. I didn't really know the methodologies, and I also only was thinking in terms of projection and astral projection, and that word. And I'd also read this common phrase that you hear, like having OBEs at will, which I tend to think is a really unhelpful term, because I don't think anyone has OBEs at will. I think what people do is, when the conditions are right, when they're in the right frame of mind, the right kind of state, usually at the right time of day. So basically, there's a whole load of conditions that usually need to be present for someone to have an OBE. So I think when we say like having an OBE at will, it's a little bit, it kind of gives people the wrong message in some ways. And I think when I was learning, I also had this concept in my mind. So I was sort of trying to force it to happen, really. And so, like you say, I think a lot of it was getting to a point where I just let go and allowed it to happen a lot more. Yeah.
interesting. Damon, is there anything?
Not really. I think we've covered a good arc. Andrew, do you have any sort of final questions or?
Yeah, I guess Grant. I mean, you have a lot of experience with this, so I'd be curious to see just like, yeah, I know you said maybe some of the neutrality and some of those things have come from maybe having the out of body experiences, and I guess what's the big takeaway for yourself? I'm sure there's many, but what maybe is some of the biggest things you've really taken away or learned from this journey of going out of the body?
I think that we're not separate from the world around us, that we're all kind of interconnected, or essentially that we're all kind of one to some degree. I guess that's a really key thing. Allowing, maybe being more compassionate in my life, those kinds of things are more sort of central. I think it's just sort of transformed me in terms of, in general, I would say I'm a pretty happy person. I've always kind of, since exploring this kind of stuff, it's definitely opened me up and made me feel more kind of at one with myself and all of the rest of it, and I think the experiences have even helped me to get through some of the hard situations, like, the losing my father, for example, which hit me quite heavily, like it does from a lot of people. But I think somehow some of these experiences gave me a certain, um, at least, I think, or an awareness that I don't think that that was the end for that situation. You know, like I think that there is some kind of continuation. I don't know exactly in what form and exactly how that all works, but I definitely feel that there's been I don't fear kind of dying, or well, I fear the idea that it could be painful, uncomfortable, and all of that kind of stuff, like, but I don't fear this idea of like that, you know, it's the end, or whatever. So I think there's a whole load of shifts in terms of how it's given me this inner sense of spirituality, in a calm, in a happiness, all of that kind of thing. So and I think at the end of the day, I don't think there's many things in the world that we can say that about. You know, like a lot of the time we can be so focused on, I don't know, making money or having material things, but I've worked through doing this kind of thing with some of the richest people in the world, and some of them are deeply unhappy. So, you know, it's I think these kinds of practices, I think, really give people what it's really about, what right life is really about. It kind of allows us to understand more about the world around us, and it also allows us to have that inner happiness that is really the goal of life, in my view.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay.
And do you think there's anything that maybe we didn't ask or we didn't cover, or in the other interviews that you've done, maybe something that you've wanted to talk about that you haven't quite got a chance to talk about, like it maybe advice wise or whatever? Anything that is not covered?
Nothing's coming to mind, to be honest. I think we covered some interesting areas and took it in a different direction to what is common, which is good. So yeah,
Cool.
I don't think there's anything that comes to mind off the top of my head.
Okay. So again, we mentioned you do coaching, and you've got the Infra-liminal and the video courses. How you just talk about how they get to your website and connect with you?
Well, my website is grahamnicholls.com, and it's all on there. They can contact me through the website. My first book, Avenues of the Human Spirit, if people want to know more about my own experiences, my own journey, that's the book to read for all of that. And like I say, my second book, Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, they can get that with the course, or it's also a new expanded 10th anniversary one is coming out later in the year. So if they follow me on Facebook or whatever, when that comes out, I'll post news about that as well.
Okay. Excellent.
Cool. Well, I was completely excited to do this interview with you, and it definitely was everything I was hoping. I hope everybody
I'm glad.
listening and watching has gotten a lot from it, and will contact you. You know, get more the books and everything like that. Get more information if they so want to. And I think this has been great.
Yeah,
So
thank you guys. I've really enjoyed it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank everybody for listening and for watching. And this is Surf the Astral, and I hope everybody has a great day.
All right. Take care, everyone.